And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the From Pillar to Post YouTube channel. I'm Joe White, and I am joined right now for a very special interview. He is Lavie Margolin. He is the author of TrumpMania, Vince McMahon, WWE, and the Making of the 45th President, that is available now on Amazon, and I'm assuming wherever else books are sold. Mr. Margolin, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, first off, for sending me a copy of the book to review. I very much appreciate it. Um, I was talking a couple weeks back. I was at a independent wrestling show, and I was talking to some of the people there that I know, and was telling them, "Hey, I just got this book, and I'm gonna go, sit out." It was a double shot show, so I sat out in my car at the arena watching or reading your book, and I told them about. They asked me, "Oh, what book is it?" And I told them, and that it was TrumpMania, about Vince McMahon and his relationship with Donald Trump, and Linda McMahon and her relationship with Donald Trump. And they asked the first question that I'm going to ask you: why did you write this book?
That's a great question. I think it was twofold. One was just watching the election and the run up to it with Donald Trump as a candidate. And I'll admit to being somebody that wasn't an active voter and didn't follow politics much, but everything Trump was saying and the debates were so engaging that I couldn't miss a moment. You couldn't turn away. So we became, as a family, very wrapped up in watching that. And as we would watch it, I would often comment to my wife, "Oh, the way he's characterizing his opponents with quick buzzwords, that's from wrestling." Or the way that he's addressing issues, that's from wrestling. So it was very hard to miss those points. And while it was on my mind, I hadn't yet thought about writing a book. And in mentioning to a friend some book projects that I was working on, as I've written mostly books in the past about career or job search areas, as that's my profession, he got so excited about the idea of TrumpMania that it got me excited, and I really delved into it.
I want to talk first off about the cover of this book and the illustrations of this book. I'm sitting here thumbing through some of them right now, and the illustrations, it says cover and interior, were done by Box Brown. Did you consult with Box about these illustrations? Because they're very much, I enjoyed them. They made me laugh throughout seeing them. I'd turn a page, another one would pop up, and it would make me laugh uproariously. And my girlfriend would sit there and go, "What's up?" And I was like, "Take a look at this," because she's a hardcore Republican who does not watch wrestling. In fact, the Royal Rumble, which was just last night as we're recording this, is the only pay-per-view besides WrestleMania that she'll watch with me, because she likes the Rumble match and the way it is and everything. But I showed her these, and she laughed too, even though she's a Republican. And she didn't even know Linda McMahon was in his cabinet. But the illustrations were very much political cartoon style. Did you have an input on these illustrations? I'm assuming you had to approve them because it's your book. But did you have a hand in designing them, or did you just tell the artist, "Hey, here's make me political cartoons out of these figures"?
So I was very lucky to connect with Box Brown. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work in the past, but he wrote a graphic novel about Andre the Giant that actually ended up being a New York Times bestseller.
Oh, okay.
And he has one coming out about Andy Kaufman. So when I reached out to him, I just explained that I was a fan and I really enjoyed his work. And when he offered to do some samples before, bringing him on as the artist for the book, I said, no, I trust you completely. I love your work. So I gave him actually sketches of the chapters, meaning like just brief snippets about each chapter. And it was really amazing what he did with it, because some of the chapters didn't have a wrestling scene or action in it. So it was very curious to see what he would do with it. So when it came back, I was really amazed, and I was enjoying looking at it so much. So I just really let Box, have at it, and I was really proud to include that in the book.
Now, people may be wondering, is this book a slamming of Donald Trump? Is it a slamming of Vince McMahon? I did. For those who want to pick up the book, I didn't find it very much, swaying one way or another. And you said you really never really got that political yourself until this election started. And of course, you probably were forming your opinions of our now president. And you had long since, had him, I'm assuming long since had an opinion of Vince McMahon and Linda McMahon. Was it important to you really not to sway one way or the other while writing this book that kind of calls it straight down the middle? Because that's the thing that surprised me about this. When you read the cover or when you read the title of this book, you're thinking, oh my Lord, this is just going to slam Donald Trump. So did you set out to make it kind of nonpartisan and straight down the middle when writing this?
Yes, I think one of the nicest compliments I've received from reviewers and people that have had the chance to view the book was pretty much 99% of the people have told me that they're really impressed that the book was fact-based and seemed fair, and I didn't go into it with an agenda. That was really important to me, that I just looked at the facts for what they were and presented them. That doesn't mean that I didn't incorporate some humor or some digs meant in the best light at all different people, just kind of to set the context for the book. But I really wanted to present the information, and people could take it for what they will. And it was even important from the wrestling scene to show that what some wrestlers felt about Trump in a positive light and some in a more negative light, even though I myself, of course, lean more towards a liberal slant now, being more keeping my eye more on the political scene. But I think the book is fair and can be enjoyed by people from either side and sort of make a decision.
Like I said, I think it was split right down the middle. I'll be honest, I voted independent in the last election. I'm sick of Democrats and Republicans, so I voted independent. And I felt like this didn't really sway one way or the other. It's right down my alley. It's just as much praising Donald Trump and Vince McMahon than it is bashing them. There's a little bit of both in here. When you're writing this book and you want it, how the concept comes up. Okay, I'm going to write a book talking about these three people's relationship and these two companies' relationship, Donald Trump's company and the WWE. Did you set out to make it, you use a lot of the Wrestling Observer in here and a lot of wrestling-based publications. I'm going through the bibliography. Did you set out to make this book for wrestling fans, or were you like, no, I have to stray away from the Dave Meltzer audience, so to speak, and the audience that listens to the show, for that matter, and go more toward the casual audience?
I wanted to capture a bit of both, although knowing that my strength was in wrestling, I think if I swayed too far outside of that expertise or knowledge, for example, if I wanted to make it feel like it was purely political, where I would compare it to, elections from 1956 or 1960. That would be sort of way outside of my area of expertise. So it did have a wrestling base, but I wanted to bring a broad picture. So that is correct that really you do have to go to a Dave Meltzer and the Wrestling Observer to sort of look at history as a first stop. And I was excited to get my issues from the late 80s in the mail that I special ordered. But my next stop was really looking at archives of newspapers and to see how they reacted and what information they shared at these various time periods.
I was going to ask you that how much of the, have you been a subscriber to the Observer for a while, and how much did you actually sit down and talk to Dave Meltzer at all about this? Did you interview him for this book at all?
I didn't interview him directly, but I had definitely shared and thanked him at certain points, and we might even connect at a podcast at some point. But certainly being an Observer subscriber, I would say since the early 2000s, with an interruption or two, that's something that I really followed closely. I remember getting a mainstream wrestling magazine in the mid 90s, and there was an ad for the Observer, and I could see, the Observer type print is known for being very small, and in the ad it was even smaller to see a sample cover, and I'm just like reading this like 2.5 font. And I'm just like, what is going on here? You know, where your eyes are open to the business for the first time.
Before we dive into the book a little bit more, because I do have quite a few questions about this. What is your background as far as, I mean, because I looked at your Amazon profile. I just typed, clicked on your name, and all your books came up. This is not the only book you've written. You write mostly, I guess you would call them self-help books, how to get a good job, etc., stuff like that. And I want to advise all my readers to go check out Lavie's catalog of books on Amazon. But as far as wrestling goes, again, this is the only book that I saw that is wrestling related. When did you first start watching wrestling and getting enamored with this culture?
So I've been a fan for 30 years, which coincidentally aligns with the book very well. Mm-hmm. I became a fan sometime between WrestleMania 4 and 5. The first match that I remember most vividly actually was the key angle that led to WrestleMania 5, the big breakup of the Mega Powers, when Hulk Hogan and Macho Man were facing the Twin Towers, Akeem and Big Boss Man. And the Boss Man, or actually maybe it's Akeem, falls on Miss Elizabeth. Miss Elizabeth has to be taken to the back. And Hulk Hogan goes to help her, and Macho Man is left to fend for himself and really gets beaten down for several minutes by the Twin Towers. And when he gets to the back, he accuses Hogan of having jealous eyes, and sort of it's off from there. So although I hadn't published a wrestling book directly, I've been involved very much off and on for a number of years. Mm-hmm. I was the type of kid that when studying marketing as an undergraduate in college, I tried to link every report to pro wrestling industry, which actually led to my name being published in a scholarly journal about wrestling fan attitudes, values, and lifestyles. And for the last few years, or last couple of years, I've been writing different guest pieces. Some have appeared on the Wrestling Observer book reviews. I've always been a big fan of wrestling books. And most actively right now, I enjoy following the world of Sinclair and Ring of Honor, mm-hmm. Speaking of politics and wrestling. And I write business articles on ROHworld.com.
Yeah, I was going to say, I went to your, I believe it's your blog, and it has like a bunch of articles that you've written, like for LinkedIn, and one of the sites is PW Ponderings, which is the article was the 2017 Ring of Honor Mid Attendance Report, which PW Ponderings kind of helps out with my CWF Mid Atlantic After Show that I do on Wednesdays. So shout out to PW Ponderings. I throughout everything, you've been watching for 30 years, and when you were doing your research for this, did anything really stand out and shock you when it comes to the relationship between Donald Trump and the WWE?
The most interesting parts, and what really surprised me, was we all know sort of the 10 poles, which we explore in depth in the book, of course, in terms of Battle of the Billionaires and ownership of Raw for those 8 days. But the lines in between were most interesting, where at certain points they rely upon each other in ways that you wouldn't even notice if you weren't looking at it. For example, within a 6-month period, Vince McMahon uses the Trump-owned Plaza, sort of his gold standard hotel in New York, to make a couple important press conference announcements. One is the debut of the World Bodybuilding Federation, mm-hmm. Which actually ended up being held in Atlantic City at one of Trump's hotels, with Trump in the front row. And then 6 months later, McMahon is at the same plaza to defend himself against steroid allegations.
Yeah, I found that quite crazy as well, is that, I need a venue to hold a press conference. Let me call up my pal Trump, because I don't want to pay for anything else, and I damn sure don't want the reporters coming to WWE headquarters. So that's how it reads to me, is that, hey, I could get the space for free. My friend Trump is going to be there. It looks good to have Trump there by my side, or in the front row, kind of. And that part really did shock me with the World Bodybuilding Federation. Honestly, the first few chapters of this book, from WrestleMania 4, 5, and then, those two chapters plus your introduction, shocked me because I didn't watch a whole lot of WWE growing up. I didn't really become a fan until about 91. I mean, because I'm only 33, so it shocked me to go back and see how much behind the scenes stuff was involved. Like, they already had WrestleMania 5 booked in that building before WrestleMania 4 was even all said and done, and how it's not even really the shocking thing is that it's not even a Trump building that they ran. They called it Trump Plaza, but I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I read it here in your book, that building, was it even owned by Trump at the time that they were running those events?
It wasn't owned by Trump Convention Hall, but it was connected to Trump's hotel. So I don't know the relationship with Atlantic City proper, if it was a city-owned building, but it was sort of like a quasi-Trump property where it'd be very easy to gain access to the building. Trump's hotels would only have a ballroom. For example, the Taj Mahal years later would host UFC, and perhaps there was 4,000 or 5,000 people there during one of its eras where it was less popular. But Boardwalk Hall was a near major arena that could really be spruced up, especially for WrestleMania 5 to host an event of this magnitude.
How much, as far as the locations and everything, for the ballroom where this was held, the hall where this was held, and did you visit any of these locations at all, or was it pretty much just Googling everything?
Yes, thankfully, I'm not too far away. I'm in New York City, so right. Atlantic City is about a 2-hour commute. In the early 2000s, one of my friends was a big gambler, for better or worse, so I would accompany him to there, and we try and time it where there was. I'd never been there for a wrestling show, but I'd been there for several boxing events and UFC as well. So I really got a sense of what the place would look like with a ring in the center of it.
It kind of reminds me of when they did WrestleMania 24, and they had to clean up that I think it was the Orange Bowl, the Citrus Bowl, whatever it was called. Did they have to do much cleaning up to that building to get it presentable for TV? Because if it's one thing Vince McMahon's known for, and if it's one thing, people could say what they want to WWE nowadays, but their production and the way they make an arena look is second to none. Did you find that in your research that McMahon had to kind of remodel the building, so to speak, redecorate that building a whole lot?
The one thing that I found was the look of the building was praised much more for WrestleMania 5. I had found descriptions that they sort of expanded the building. Logistically, it's sort of hard to imagine how much they could have expanded it. I had seen places where they had said 2,000 more seats. That seemed a little bit unrealistic to me, but there was definitely some remodeling and some sprucing up of the building, because it's sort of it's not a beautiful building on the inside, especially. It reminds me of the old arena bit that used to host the Washington Capitals, right, in the Washington D.C. area.
Mm-hmm. The old hockey arena out there.
Yes.
Back before they started playing in the MCI Center, which is now the Verizon Center. How long did it take you to write this? Because I'm sitting here in dates are as early as last summer. So how long did it take you to write this book, and when did you, after you obviously you compiled your research first and get an outline and everything, but how long did it take you from when you first, started putting pen to paper, so to speak, to the end?
In terms of the major draft, or the first draft, it was about 4 months. Thankfully, I work in higher ed, and although I do teach a class, but I'm not a full-time professor. But on Fridays, there's off days in the summer, so you sort of have that weekend to build momentum around that. But when I start my research and start delving into things, it's something that I enjoy so much, so that even if I'm doing it in the late night, it's going to be something that I'm enjoying. And then it would go to editing. Thankfully, I was able to connect with a wonderful editor in John Lister. He wrote a great book about the history of ECW, and he actually writes for Fighting Spirit magazine. So he took a few weeks to edit it, and then to box, to do the illustrations, and then to format it. So I would say it was about 6-7 month process from end to end.
It's not too bad. Book this size. I mean, it's right about 200 pages. If you, let's see here, I have it here right in front of me. It's 189 pages, and then if you do, it's a little bit over 200 if you go into the Where Are They Now section. So nice work. That's timely. The publisher for this book, it's I'm not seeing a publisher here. Is this self-published?
Yes. So my wife and I have an imprint which is called H. Delilah Business and Career Press. H. Delilah is actually a takeoff of our oldest daughter's name. So this was the first time publishing, as I mentioned, in the wrestling umbrella, but most of our books relate to career or job search or LinkedIn. But the platform that we use to publish is through Amazon, the Kindle format, and then they have CreateSpace, which is their printing arm.
Okay. I didn't know Amazon did the printing, like the actual paper books. I thought they were only Kindle only because they're looking, you can't go anywhere without seeing Audible and Kindle and all that good stuff. Let's get into a little bit of politics here. I don't really like to go deep into politics on my channel because I feel like my channel is a breakaway from that, but it relates to what we're covering here in the book. You could give me an answer that's Vince McMahon and WWE related or not, or Linda McMahon related, but since Trump has taken office, he just celebrated 1 year. He's got the State of the Union coming up here, I believe Wednesday or Tuesday or Wednesday. What shocks you the most about his presidency so far? And because there's been, like I said, I'll watch the news, but I can't watch it for no more than 5 minutes before it bores the hell out of me. But it seems like every day there's some kind of new scandal where this guy's done shot his mouth off too much, or saying my button's bigger than yours, and I'm not a feminist, stuff like this that just makes me laugh. But what has shocked you the most?
It's hard to be as shocked anymore. I think at a certain point it becomes numbing. When you hear about another FBI bigwig being fired, that would sort of define a presidency in the past, and now it's sort of like, okay, who's next? What happened yesterday? What will happen today, and what will happen tomorrow? I think since the overall shock of the election, it's just sort of that feeling of somebody that's willing to break boundaries, and we keep looking to the president to be presidential, quote unquote, but he's just going to do his own thing. He's going to do what works for him, what's worked in his career as a business person running several companies, and he's not so worried about what other people think. He loves the praise of his supporters. As I've read, that's about a third of people will support him no matter what he does, and he'll just keep moving forward with that. So there's so many moments where we could say, I can't believe he did that, or that aspect was particularly shocking. But I think week to week, nearly everything has been. As I mentioned, as somebody that's has to lean more liberal based on our current politics, that I'm just thankful after reading a book like Fire and Fury that it's such a mess in the White House that what somebody like Steve Bannon might have planned to do wasn't viable just because all the ducks weren't in a row.
Fire and Fury, of course, popped up on the Grammys last night. The Grammys have been getting into the politics and the Me Too movement. They kind of interweave with each other because of some of the things the president said and done. Same thing with all the award ceremonies, Hollywood getting involved, entertainment in general. In fact, Lita last night in the Royal Rumble, not a lot of people touched on this. No, not a lot of people in the wrestling business touched on this. Lita had hashtag times up on her ring gear last night. Are you surprised that WWE, as braggadocious as Vince McMahon is and can be and has been, I mean, here's a guy who, when Steve Austin looks at him and goes, hey, all your superstars are walking on eggshells and are afraid to piss somebody off, he goes, well, just don't piss anybody off. It doesn't call any attention. They're very similar in that they don't care about, you're right, they don't care about what other people think of each other. They're going to do what they're going to do for their business and to keep their profit margins up. Are you surprised that WWE has not acknowledged? I mean, you go into the book and say, yes, Stephanie and Triple H and Vince tweeted about him winning, but it hasn't really been shown or mentioned on WWE TV that and you figure Vince would want to tout the fact that we have a WWE Hall of Famer in the White House, pal. Ha, ha, ha. Are you surprised that they haven't even barely mentioned this? They haven't mentioned this at all since he took the office.
I'm not surprised, just because it's such a divisive presidency, and they risk alienating, many of their viewers if they come out in support. I think if there was any wiggle room, for example, George W. Bush, he had his detractors and he had his supporters, but if WWE would come out to support him, which actually they did before the 2000 election. They really didn't get much heat for that. But this presidency, it's just, I think people would literally turn away from any product that would outwardly support it. You might get some people on the other side that would sort of go for it more. Actually, the Pro Wrestling Torch, as I referenced in the book, had a survey about that, and a few people had said that they would support the company more, but the others were sort of more up in the air. I think they just have to be careful of it. I think if Vince was sort of course, he's the king of kings, the boss of bosses, but I think now he's corporate and he listens to his advisors, and from George Barrios to Triple H to Stephanie or whoever it may be, I think if he was ready to jump out ahead and celebrate it, as they love to do any mainstream celebrity or somebody that's accomplished something, and with his wife being part of the administration, I think he knows not to touch it right now.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, because here he is now. Are you gonna? He's come out. I was gonna ask, are you gonna write a book about the new XFL? But he's come out and said he doesn't. It sounds as if he doesn't know and doesn't care if Trump supports it or not. But isn't it telling that the first thing that he was asked is about this kneeling thing and the time? And he uses the time-honored tradition, which made me roll my eyes when he said those words. But here he is starting a football league, saying politics aren't going to play into it. He doesn't know if Donald Trump's going to support it. What are your thoughts on the whole XFL thing and the way he's because that was the first question that reporters asked when they began taking questions last week during that press conference. Everybody kept asking about the kneeling and the politics of it. So are you surprised that they even would ask that to him and he took that stance on it? And I think a follow-up to that would be, are you surprised that doesn't bleed more into the professional wrestling business as far as, the politics of it all?
I'm not surprised that people asked. I think that especially from the wrestling community, we were all sort of curious as to if that would come up as a question. And thankfully it was addressed. And you could kind of get a sense that, he does lean towards that more in terms of making sure that people will stand for the national anthem. But I think with pro wrestling and politics, again, they touch it when they think it will benefit them.
Yeah.
But I think now they're just very careful of not touching it, as it's very hard to sort of find a heel and a face in this realm. because half your audience will support one and half will support the other, but not in a tweener role where you can have like a Roman Reigns where it's people will care one way or another. It'll sort of take the entertainment out of it and create more of a negative atmosphere on both sides.
There are sections in this book where you go off into paragraphs explaining stuff about each wrestler. Like you mentioned Jimmy Snuka, and then what follows is about a half a page explaining the murder story that took place up in Allentown. And one of the things that isn't mentioned is the rumor about Vince walking up there into the sheriff's office with a suitcase full of money and pretty much paying the police department off up there, which, again, is a rumor, folks. But why did you feel the need to go into... I'm reading the book, and I guess it's not so much as a criticism as to it doesn't fit into the Trump-McMahon narrative. I didn't get that sense, but why did you include like stuff like that of going off onto explaining, hey, this is what Snuka did, this is what this wrestler did, this is what, I think even, the steroid scandal is brung up in here. Why did you feel the need to go and branch away from the Trump-McMahon timeline, so to speak, and go off into stuff like that?
I think each era of the WWE is so unique, especially when we're looking at it at a lens from various WrestleManias, that to really understand the context of what went on in each show, we want to understand the different characters that are there. So without going too far afield in each story, I thought it was important to sort of explain, who was in front of Trump. What were they saying? What were they doing? Especially if it was somebody that he interacted with, and sort of where did they end up? And did it have any interplay with the Trump-McMahon story?
You go into a fascinating story about how, I want to say it was WrestleMania 4, Trump's then wife gets a drink spilled on her, and he ends up, and one of the stories about how he claims to be sitting in the front row, and he gets up and leave. I'm telling you guys, it's a really good book. The concept of it, people may go, why would I want to read that? Trust me, you want to read it because it really puts into like a good timeline of these two businessmen's relationship, and then his wife bleeding into it. Is that what you set out to do with this book as far as the structure goes? Was it designed to be kind of, because it very much reads like a very, very packed timeline. Is that what you wanted to get out of this when writing it?
Yeah, I thought the velocity of explaining their relationship was the length of it. When we look at certain milestones, certainly, having Linda get a spot in the administration with limited experience in this area, or Trump being a main event headliner for WrestleMania, yes, you could sort of build out a little bit of a business and somewhat of a personal relationship to be in those positions. But when we look at it from a 30-year time frame, it really builds a more complete story, not only of their friendship and relationship, but what was Trump exposed to by being at WrestleMania 7, what's been described as the Stars and Stripes WrestleMania, the most patriotic WrestleMania. He was able to sort of see in a way that it was delivered in a somewhat simplistic way of good versus evil, how heroes can wrap themselves around the flag and how we can boo the foreigner or the turncoat American.
Thus, make America great again. Let's build the wall. It very much, you're absolutely right. He kind of cherry picked what he wanted to, as far as how to present himself from those WrestleManias. There's definitely a parallel there. Any hopes of or I guess you would say wants of wanting to write a sequel to this? Is there room for a sequel for this?
I think there's room for a revised edition, certainly, as they say, right? The news cycle never stops. And when this book ended, the XFL, rumors hadn't even started yet.
Right.
So there's always something going on and something to look at, but probably something that takes off from this time period for the next few years. I think there might be a little bit of updating there, but I think that's where the story ends. But certainly the bug of wrestling history and perhaps some aspects of Trump in other contexts would be something interesting to look at. Some of the ideas that I've had where politics meet wrestling. I think the Collision in Korea shows in 1995 that set pro wrestling records, whether they were sold tickets or not, of 130,000 or 180,000 tickets. That's fascinating to look at from a geopolitical and a wrestling perspective. To look at Trump's relationship with the boxing industry and even managing Mike Tyson during the time period covered in the early chapters of the book, and in regards to Vince McMahon's failures, the pre-1984, looking at things like the Evel Knievel Snake River Canyon jump. So those are the ideas that I have in mind if I were to write something, again, related to the industry.
Because I was gonna say, there's a lot. It's a beautifully written book. It's a well-written book, and you definitely have room to grow here as far as Vince. You could leave Trump out of it and write 1,000,000 books on Vince McMahon. I mean, there's a lot of people that have done that, but I'm more interested in the stuff like you said, the Evel Knievel thing and all that good stuff that people aren't covering. Are you surprised? I'm going to ask. This is the last question about this book. Again, it's called TrumpMania: Vince McMahon, WWE, and the Making of the America's 45th President. I highly advise you go check this out. But my last question about the book, before we get into some other wrestling questions here, is: you're the only one that's written a book about this subject. You're the only one that's written that I've seen that has written a book about these two or these three. Are you surprised by that?
I think, in publishing, things move slowly when you're sort of not doing it independently. So if somebody had that idea, they didn't launch it yet, I think you sort of need to have the tools to do so. To approach it from outside of wrestling would be difficult, because not only would you have to research and learn the story, you would have to learn more about the wrestling business and how it works, and what's real, what really happened, what didn't really happen, and where it interplays. Even looking at Trump buys Raw, the public, the financial community was fooled in thinking Trump bought Raw, but what did they think he really bought? So you have all of those where kayfabe meets reality situations that just makes it challenging to write a book like this.
You even went into that in the book where, I think you said one of the business networks thought it was real and were reporting it like it was real, and they pretty much had the WWE, I think, actually had to contact them and bring them down to earth, so to speak. So you're absolutely right. I mean, if somebody is not a wrestling fan and hasn't followed the business and doesn't know what the word kayfabe means, it would be very hard for them. Let's get into some modern questions here. You were at Raw 25 last week. You were in the Barclays Center. You tweeted out pictures of it. What are your thoughts on the modern product? And from somebody who just wrote a book about what a businessman Vince is, what are your thoughts on the way he is running that company today? It's publicly traded. People say they really can't go past the TVP. We're in the PG era. Some people think the PG era started because of Linda McMahon's Senate runs, because it did kind of start around the same time. What are your thoughts on the modern wrestling product?
I think those of us that have been watching wrestling a while, it's very hard to satisfy us from an entertainment perspective. I once read something very interesting, that you'll never love wrestling as much as you did when you were 11 or 12, because you go in with fresh eyes no matter when you start, and oftentimes whoever the star was in that era, it's sort of, you feel drawn to them. Now there's extreme examples perhaps during the early to mid 90s, when the company was going through its lows, that you could recognize, okay, when the Attitude Era came in, or the Monday Night Raw wars, this is a better time period, but there's a certain sort of nostalgia and special time that's very hard to break out of. That being said, as a business, they've created a very financially successful base for themselves that isn't based on creative. When we would think about the business in the past, that was driven by firstly house shows and then pay-per-view buy rates and then ratings. We would say, who's the star? How popular are they? How is Hulk Hogan drawing? How's Randy Savage drawing? How's Steve Austin drawing? And so on. But right now they have this institutionalization of TV rights and network subscriptions where it could be Roman Reigns that's a champion, or it could be Brock Lesnar, but things are going to remain consistent. Right now, as a fan and just thinking about their creative product, it's sort of there where it seems very hard for them to attach a rocket to somebody and have them really take off. I feel a little bit of sad seeing Seth Rollins being stuck in a tag team right now. He really seemed like he was on the cusp of something, and now he's kind of stuck. And I'm a little bit worried with a Braun Strowman. How will they protect him? He seems like somebody that should be challenging for the title at WrestleMania, not in a triple threat match, at the Royal Rumble, or losing unexpectedly at a pay-per-view months before. So I think they've lost a bit of that, where they used to be able to identify somebody that could be a superstar, sort of put a rocket on their back, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But if it did work, things could really take off from there.
As a guy who studies the business, kind of like me, when people sit there and they use the thing of, oh, they can't go edgy because it's publicly traded, I get, do you get sick like me? Do you get sick and tired of hearing that term, publicly traded company? Because the fact of the matter is, they've been publicly traded since 1999 in the heart of the Attitude Era. They were doing, choppy pee-pee 6 months before they would go publicly traded. Does it surprise you to hear that excuse from fans and people like Dave Meltzer so much?
Well, it could be exhausting, especially when the company, Stephanie McMahon has certain buzzwords, or George Barrios at a conference call. But I think they don't have to be shocking, shock TV, or do lowbrow things in order to be sophisticated and appeal to
Absolutely.
A wider audience.
You're right on that. But I mean, something like blood, for instance. They use blood capsules one minute, and then 6 months later, when they try to ooh and ah with the blood again, it's real. Not that I would want anybody to really cut their heads open in 2018, but it does look hokey. What do you think is the key, if there is a key, if there is a MacGuffin, so to speak, that will bring them back up in the ratings, or can it be done? I mean, because everybody sits there and goes, 15 years ago they were drawing 8.4s and beating Monday Night Football most weeks. I personally don't think we'll ever get to that hype again. Monday Night Football's ratings are declining even. But do you think they'll ever get wrestling in general or get to that height again?
I don't know if they'll get there in terms of ratings, just because the world of media is so split right now. But in terms of overall interest, when we think back to mid-90s doldrums and they were about to be canceled by USA Network, and they'd be taping Raw, and as X-Pac once said, it was depressing. You could see a high school clock behind the bleachers on television. You'd never think that they would have gotten to where they did. I think that again, it's being led by creative, where once you see somebody has it, which is hard to find, that you really accentuate their positives and not look for ways to bring them back down, and see how far they can go. Somebody like Braun Strowman has it right now. Let's see where he can go, because there's been so many failures that you really want them to have a chance, but it didn't work out. For me, the last person that stood out was Dean Ambrose. When he first came in, he was so unique, so different from everything else, maybe like Terry Funk crossed with a Roddy Piper. but then they just made him silly, and he never recovered from it.
You're right. I think that the term, I always use the term organic. It has to have, you mentioned strapping the rocket to somebody is hard to do. It's very hard to do nowadays. It has to happen organically. And the last person I can remember being organic is Daniel Bryan, and that was more of the fans lifting him up and bucking, and pretty much bucking the system. They were they forced McMahon's hand that WrestleMania at WrestleMania 30, and they lifted Daniel Bryan up. Now, the crazy thing is, and this is the fans doing this, is not Vince at all. Once Daniel Bryan got to that mountaintop, the fans were crapping on him, and he got injured. And it was probably not that it's ever a good thing getting injured, but it probably is a good thing he got injured and was forced to relinquish the title at that time because of the fact of the fans were like, okay, he won, now what? Do you think Strowman is the next guy for it to happen? That it's that organic push is behind him. They wanted him to be a heel. They tried hard to make him a heel. The crowd wasn't having him as a heel. Do you think that Strowman is that organic guy and that for whatever reason Vince McMahon just doesn't see it?
I think that there's definitely there's a feel, there's a uniqueness to him. I think McMahon definitely appreciates what he brings to the table, but he's not ready necessarily to say, okay, let's let him loose. Let's see how far he could go. He's just seemed special since they signed him. He came from, they hadn't been taking powerlifters, world's strongest man people in a while. So it's sort of like he came from a unique world, and he, sort of what he lets out hints of on social media every once in a while is he seems like he has a good sense of humor as well when he breaks kayfabe every once in a while through social media. So I think there's something there. To me, also somebody that's been underutilized. Big E seems like he has something to me as well. Like he just seems like he has a very engaging personality and very dynamic, but within the context of the successful trio there, he's doing well. But I would just be very curious to see if he was allowed to be on his own, what would happen.
We often talk about once McMahon's gone, because he's pretty much never going to retire. You're going to have to force that, that chair away from the man, or heaven forbid he has to croak in order to give that power up, to give that company up. People are always saying, well, Triple H is going to take over and it's going to be good. And Triple H is going to take over and we're going to get NXT style wrestling. And I'm sitting here going, no, that ain't going to happen. Triple H ain't getting the reins to nothing. That's going to be Stephanie's company. And who taught Stephanie? Vince. So would you agree in the aspect of we may see things go worse once Vince McMahon goes away before it ever gets better?
I think it could go, it could really go either way. And it's interesting to hear these shocking stories right now that Vince McMahon noticed that the UFC sold for this huge amount, so maybe that's his end goal. I think at the end of the day, like we were talking about with the XFL or a friendship with Trump or a sale for a big dollar figure, is Vince McMahon wants to walk away with respect and have people say, outside of wrestling even, he's a great businessman. And his friendship with Trump is a lot about validating each other. Although some people might not respect us or give each of us a hard time, we respect each other's, and that means something. Or the XFL, I want to show that I can make this successful. Or with wrestling, you might have made fun of it as a non-wrestling fan, but look, I ended up selling it for X number of billion of dollars to a Disney or to a Fox. So remember me as being a smart person, a good businessman.
I'm going to go into something that a lot of people are going to turn their heads and go, why are you asking this, Joe? But you said you follow Sinclair and you follow the Ring of Honor stuff now. Have you been following Ring of Honor since the sale? You probably been following it before they got sold to Sinclair, but you said you follow the Sinclair era. Have you been following that era since the beginning and paying really close attention to it since that beginning?
Yes, I'm a live events person. I'm not a big tape trader, or I don't watch much like video on demand. But thankfully, Mike Johnson, a PW insider in 2004, 2005, he used to run wrestling bus trips. So
Right.
outside of the Hammerstein Ballroom, you could get on a bus, and he would take you with 30 other wacky wrestling fans,
Right.
different
Yes.
characters, to Philadelphia, to New Jersey. So I actually saw Austin Aries beat Samoa Joe for the title.
Oh wow.
And I saw one of the Joe Punk matches. I believe it was the second. So I was very much engaged in that era. And since they came to New York regularly, I would go to the Hammerstein Ballroom or Manhattan Center in the same venue to see their shows, or whenever they'd float around New York. So I've been a fan for a long time from a live events perspective.
So you're following this, and then, you know, Jim Cornette comes in, and he kind of brokers, the way he describes it, he kind of brokers this deal with Sinclair. Him and Gary Jester kind of swoop in with Kerry Silkin, and they broker this deal with Sinclair. And I'm just wondering, because Kayfabe Commentaries did a Breaking Kayfabe with Jim Cornette, and he details his side of this story. As somebody who follows it has followed this closely, the Sinclair era, very closely, do you think Cornette kind of, because I'm a Jim Cornette guy, I'll admit that straight up for anybody listening. I'm a huge Cornette fan. Do you think Cornette's vision for the company could have worked as far as them having a home arena and actually getting a structure of things? You know, he even mentioned finding a abandoned grocery store, an abandoned Target, and calling that your honor arena. And instead of going around to different arenas, piping and draping, you do everything in-house. Kind of like setting up what I don't know if you've ever heard of CWF Mid-Atlantic, but they have the CWF they have the Mid-Atlantic Sportatorium, where all you got to do literally is walk in there and flip a switch, and you can run a wrestling show. The ring is there, the lights are there, the sound is there, it's centralized. What were your thoughts as somebody who, you're up in New York, and New Yorkers in that whole Northeast crowd have a vision of what wrestling should be that is sometimes different than the rest of the world. In fact, I envy you guys because you get so much of it. Do you think Cornette's vision for that company could have worked back in the day?
It was a very weird time, the acquisition of Sinclair by Sinclair of Ring of Honor. There was this thought that, okay, if ROH is drawing, let's say, between 500 and 600. As we have all these television markets, maybe we could bring it up to 700 or 800 and make some additional money, as TV was seen as sort of a panacea that once you get on TV, as it had been in wrestling in the past, especially when it's a broadcast channel, if we have a CBS, a Fox, or an ABC, it can't help but be ignored, and it will raise all ships. Everything about the company will be more successful. The pay-per-views, the ticket sales, merchandise. But what happened was that the creative wasn't as inspired. The talent wasn't yet ready as it had been. And the product actually went down for the first few years of Sinclair ownership. If we were to judge it by live events, they had less live events and drew less. And it took them a number of years to emerge out of that. The other surprise was that although Sinclair was a television station, the live events that they had ever done was really news. So they weren't used to doing live events on location. And they're not only politically conservative company, they're a very fiscally conservative company. So they didn't want to spend the money on the production. So Cornette may have had a certain vision, but it would be very hard to deliver that when the company wasn't willing to fund that or take risks. And and somebody like Joe Koff, who has run the the company from the Ring of Honor division of Sinclair. He's very conservative in terms of risk averse. And somebody like Cornette didn't fit as well in that environment. If Cornette's really trying to fire people up by tossing a table over or kind of having a diatribe against somebody, it might have been seen in traditional wrestling as one thing, but to Koff, that just seems like a lawsuit waiting to happen. So if he was given free reign, certainly, I know sometimes when Cornette sort of has a handle of things and certain magical periods of Smoky Mountain, and we look at its peak in Knoxville drawing, it did great, but really that company had averaged in the 500s or 600s. So it would really have to have worked for his vision. Cornette, just one more point about it, he did have a wonderful idea after he was at Ring of Honor when ROH was getting that short time period with Destination America, partnered with TNA. One would be on 1 hour and the other would be on the other hour. He's like, why are they using the same hour program that everyone's already seen? Although it might be short run and you might not be making much money from it, why not produce a show where you can say, hey, this is our best work, get some decent ratings and see what other networks would be interested.
I've often wondered that as well, because I'm sitting here looking at an article you wrote on ROHworld.com talking about understanding Ring of Honor within the Sinclair universe. You wrote it about a year ago, and you mentioned Comet. And they're on Comet, and then they're on the Sinclair stations. I mean, the local Sinclair station where I live at, where I grew up at in Richmond, Virginia, which I'm now 3 hours away in Danville, and about a year after I moved here, Sinclair bought the local ABC affiliate, so now we get Ring of Honor on the ABC affiliate. But they also air on, as of this article, they're airing on Comet, and now I think instead of Comet, it's a different, I think it's called... Here, I think it's called Stadium TV is what they're airing on now. And it's the same program, just in different time slots, but it's two different networks. So do you think that same idea kind of holds up now to where, okay, watch Ring of Honor on your local affiliate, but on Comet, we're going to air like a recap show or something like to that effect, or kind of like how TNA does Explosion to Impact back in the day. I don't even think they still do Explosion anymore. But do you think that should be still going on with them since they have multiple networks at their disposal?
So in terms of doing a recap show or a classic show, I think that's a wonderful idea, because it doesn't cost them much more money to produce something like that when you already have content. What Sinclair has been doing somewhat quietly and will grow once their acquisition of Tribune goes through is they've been building up these multicast networks, which for those that aren't familiar, if you use a rabbit ears to pick up domestic TV, right? So ABC might be channel 7, but you have also 7.2, 7.3. So Sinclair fills these with these on the cheap networks like a Charge TV, a Comet TV. They've partnered to build up Stadium. And that's where they place on all of these channels Ring of Honor Wrestling as well. I do see it as a positive, even though they're bicycling the same program, in that it shows that Sinclair can utilize Ring of Honor to build up a new network. When you see social media for Charge TV, they might say, okay, Gunsmoke is on at 8 and Ring of Honor at 9, but it's Ring of Honor that's always getting the social media interactions and the attention.
I think that too, though, but the one downfall of these stations is if you're using a pair of rabbit ears with a converter box or a TV that has a converter box built in, those are the only channels you get. You have a little bit of an on-screen guide, but you maybe still get, Fox, NBC, CBS, ABC, PBS, your big networks, and then you get those 2.4, 3.5 stations, whatever the case may be. Usually one of them is a weather type of channel. The other one's like Me TV that runs classic TV shows like Mr. Ed, I Love Lucy, Stadium, which Ring of Honor's now on, Comet, which is more of sci-fi. But if you are living in a town like mine, and I have Comcast, those stations are hard to find. So you end up going to the local affiliate anyway. But now they're talking about buying WGN. They're buying Tribune, which means that's a huge network. I mean, a huge network. That's on every major cable satellite system that's out there. Do you think they're going to get away from the classic local TV model and just air it on WGN, or do you think it's still going to be both? Do you see them putting a secondary show on WGN once they own that network? Because the WGN Tribune sale talks of that, and the subject of that, as far as Ring of Honor is concerned, has kind of died down in recent months. So do you see them really pushing that Ring of Honor if that does go through?
So I think at the end of the day, Sinclair is a local affiliate company, so they'll always prioritize that. And if they see value in keeping Ring of Honor on their affiliates, they'll do that. But I think the timing is perfect for WGN America to air Ring of Honor for two reasons. One is that as the sale became clearer, WGN America decided that we are not going to pay exorbitant fees for original programming. They had a couple programs that were beginning to build buzz for a couple of years, 1 or 2 years, and then they cut them out and they started acquiring cheaper programming from Canada or wherever. So when you think about, okay, a national cable network that still wants to do decent ratings, that doesn't want to pay for it, where do you go for that traditionally? Professional wrestling. So enter Ring of Honor. So I think that would be perfect. Whether they would produce a whole nother show for it is another question. I would first lean back on it to say probably not. They'd probably at first bicycle the same 1 hour that they've done in the past.
Here, I have a couple more questions. I know it's getting late, but the WGN partnership, does it look like it is going to go through? Is it safe to assume that yes, it's happening? Because I haven't heard anything that says it's not.
There was actually broadcasting and cable and Hollywood Reporter actually thought that it was going to be approved on Friday.
Really? So we could hear something as early as this Friday?
Yeah, so they actually thought last Friday. So I was checking closely today. So I think it'll probably be this week or next. The other clue is that for approval, from what we've heard, Sinclair has been asked to sell 10 stations in some markets where they have like a clear advantage in terms of local broadcasting. So it would be very hard for the FCC to justify Sinclair owning 2 stations that are among the top 4 in the market. So within 10 markets, they've been asked to sell their stations before a deal is approved. So likely those will be sold to Fox.
So it's weird because they own the Fox affiliate in the town. Like I said, they own the Fox affiliate in Richmond. And then you drive 2 hours away and they own an ABC affiliate. You drive 2 hours south of me, they own a what used to be I think it's a CW affiliate, which are generally most of the time tied in with Fox anyway. It's weird how they're all over the place on the East Coast. But you mentioned something about, okay, the deal goes through. WGN's a station that does not want to pay they don't want to pay high money for first run programming. My girlfriend loved the show Salem, I think, that was on there, and it's gone. She followed that as long as they ran it. I know this is going to sound silly to a lot of people listening, and maybe even to you, Lavie, but I have to ask. TNA, they're on Pop TV. And they've teamed up with Ring of Honor in the past on the Destination America. I know they probably didn't have any say in it. Well, maybe a little bit. But anyway, you know what I'm getting at here. Could we see this again? WGN is in a lot of homes in America, probably more than Pop TV is. And you said wrestling could be the key to get, for WGN. It's first run programming. It's cheaper to produce. And, they own Ring of Honor. They own one of the companies. Anthem Entertainment owns, they've been cutting costs everywhere they could possibly cut costs. I guess the question, what it boils down to, is do you think we could see an Impact Wrestling on WGN once this goes through, if they could strike some kind of deal?
That's a great question. You never say never, in this business.
Oh, yeah.
I think that Sinclair will always look internally first. What can they do with Ring of Honor? How can they maximize that brand? I think there is still understandable friction between the companies, as Anthem had given them a hard time with the Hardys, and they lost some pay-per-view revenue the previous year. But from what I read with the new administration, with Anthem in Canada, that they're looking to improve relations with Ring of Honor and other companies. So, you never know. But I think with something like WGN, unless they were looking to build a wrestling block, which we've seen more locally and at a very short time on Destination America, then it would probably be Ring of Honor specific for the time being.
I think the last thing WGN ever did in wrestling was that reality show Wrestling with Death, about the family that wrestles by day and runs a funeral parlor by day and wrestles at night, and that was lasted for maybe half a season. Was garbage. So I hope when Ring of Honor gets on there, the fans who are already watching WGN don't groan at it. I want to thank you so much for coming on and doing this interview. I know it's late at night, but I want to thank you so much. It's been a kind of a pain. We were supposed to record this last night, and then it hit me that, oh, crap, I forgot about the Rumble. Real quick before we go, what'd you think about the Rumble, Ronda Rousey coming in, all this, WWE's kind of been all over ESPN and Twitter today, mainstream Twitter today, with this signing. Do you think it's going to do them any good, bring any new fans back?
I think it's the perfect move for them. She's the right type of celebrity. She's somebody that understands the business. She loves the business. They have a bit of a storyline to play off of from a couple of years ago, if the rumors prove true, of her teaming up with The Rock to face Triple H and Stephanie. It's a nice, light storyline at WrestleMania, the type that draws headlines, and hopefully they can capitalize on it. If you can have somebody like a Braun Strowman or somebody else kind of emerge as a star when you have all these extra eyes, then that'll benefit everyone.
Me personally, I'm not looking forward to a tag match. I want to see her in a singles match role, but like Meltzer said today, we'll get that eventually. She's probably going to be like a female Brock Lesnar, and it's funny how the reporter last night from ESPN's asking her, are you only going to come in for the big events? She says no, and then Meltzer turns around and says no, she's only going to come in for the big events. That's what she should do. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Well, Mr. Margolin, I want to thank you again so much for doing this. Where can the people find you on social media and everything?
Thank you so much. The best way to reach me to talk wrestling is on Twitter, at Lavie Marg, LAVIE MARG. And the best place to read my non-TrumpMania related writings is probably on Ring of Honor World, ROHworld.com.
Yeah, and also I'm going to go ahead and give out there's a list here that I'm looking at, and I don't know if you want me to give it out here, but I will. It's Lion Club Job Search, or Lion Cub, LIONCUB jobsearch.com. There's a whole list of wrestling related articles that you've written that I'm sitting here thumbing through, and websites where to find them. The majority of them, of course, are on Ring of Honor, ROHworld.com. One last question, because it just popped into my head. New Japan, I saw you put it out on Twitter today. They sold out that building. With the Ring of Honor relationship, do you think that bleeds over into everything that Ring of Honor has going forward?
So I was more concerned about it last year. It seemed like New Japan would be more aggressive with it, especially when they did the quick sellouts of the Long Beach shows last year in the smaller part of the building. But from the feeling that I get now, Kidani, who was directly running New Japan, he seemed very aggressive about wanting to go into the American market. Right now, it just doesn't seem like they're that aggressive, that's where they want to be as much. So I think that the New Japan Ring of Honor relationship remains strong. If it changes, it would be very interesting, because when we look at attendance figures for Ring of Honor, it's definitely the New Japan branded shows that are leading the pack, or at least the shows that have like a Kenny Omega that do the best attendance figures.
It's weird that they're backing off like that, and not, because you look at a WWE crowd, there's Bullet Club shirts everywhere in that crowd. I mean, they're everywhere. And then they did this big angle where Kenny Omega is, I don't know if you watch Being the Elite at all, but the latest episode that they put up today kind of hinted that maybe the Young Bucks are staying with Omega, because I'm sitting there going, you're about to go into America where the Young Bucks are revered. I mean, revered. And that whole Bullet Club thing is revered. And you're breaking them up, but they still sold out. So anyway, again, I want to thank you so much for doing this, sir. And folks, feel free to check out the book, TrumpMania, Vince McMahon, WWE, and the Making of America's 45th President. Again, Lavie, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
And I want to encourage everybody to please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. And if you're able to, become a Patreon supporter here for Pillar to Post for just $1 a month. The link below in the description. And we will see you down the road.